Hello and welcome to Take Me Home, the podcast offering a social democratic alternative for the politically homeless. I'm Hilary Salt.
And I'm Sebastian Moore.
And for the first time in a little while, we are joined by a guest, an esteemed guest, Dolan Cummings. Welcome, Dolan.
Hello, thank you.
Remind me where you're joining us from?
I'm in Kendal, so not too far away.
Ah, right, okay, superb.
I'm a big fan of Kendal. I like Kendal.
Yeah. Before we go any further, I did just want to say to Sebastian that he does have another title now, don't you? Do you want to mention?
I suppose so. And this is weird because we're recording this before anybody knows. But there is a by-election coming up in Gorton and Denton, which has been heavily publicised because there was a chance that Andy Burnham was going to stand. And I can announce that I will be the SDP candidate.
So you heard it here first, everybody. Congratulations. Hard work ahead.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
If anybody wants to come and help canvassing and knocking on doors, please let us know. We are very appreciative of any help we can get. So that kind of stole your thunder a little bit there, Dolan. So let me now just turn to...
You're knocking over water.
Let me just turn to introducing you. So... I'm a big fan of your Substack, L'Esprit de l'Escalier. Now, Sebastian and I had a little chat because we'd never really understood what that phrase meant. Do you want to explain it?
Well, in French, it means the wit of the stairs. And so it's the idea that you're at a party or a salon or something and maybe having an argument, and then it's only on the way out, and when you're walking down the stairs, you think, I should have said, and you work out exactly, and it happens to most of us a lot. And so this stuff I'm writing on there, some of it maybe doesn't seem all that timely, but I thought it'd be an idea just to be an outlet for stuff even after the fact. As I say, whether it's about Brexit or COVID or the fall of Rome, when you have an idea, it's never too late to put it down and think about. So that's the spirit.
That's
Superb.
Amazing. I love that.
Yeah, I like that.
I'm going to start using that as well.
Yeah.
It'll make me sound quite posh, won't it?
Yes.
Oh, L'Esprit de l'Escalier.
Indeed, yeah. And there was a couple of articles on that, Dolan, that I want to talk about because they're very SDP-ish, so we will do that. But let me also tell everybody your other attributes. So you're also published author, 3 novels, including the latest one, The Pictish Princess, and other stories from before there was a Scotland.
That's right.
Do you want to say a couple of words about that?
Well, it's kind of it occurred to me that Scotland at that 8th century roughly, and at that time Scotland was like a microcosm of modern Britain with Picts, Gaels, Northumbrians, and Welsh effectively. So that's the kind of the milieu that people are living in, and characters are kind of interweaving between those different cultures. So that, yeah, I mean, otherwise it's kind of an adventure story, a love story, all those kinds of things. But it's a fascinating period.
Sounds great. Add to my reading list, which is growing by the day. So shall we turn to these couple of Substack posts that you wrote, Dolan, that I think everybody will be really interested in. If people don't read Dolan's Substack, do dip into it. There's loads of different things, but the 2 that I wanted to talk about were, there was one on strangers and there's one on faith, flag and family. And I thought both of those were really interested from a kind of social democratic perspective because they grapple with some of the values and things that we kind of the heart of our beliefs, but that perhaps are sometimes quite difficult to talk about and engage people on in the current climate. So that's why I thought it would be good to talk to you about these issues. So do you want to say a little bit about the faith, flag and family one? I think I was laughing out loud because I think one of the very early paragraphs in it, you say, well, let's admit it just sounds fascist. But do you want to tell us about, why you thought that was a good thing to write about, maybe some of the things that came out of that article?
Yeah, I think it's an unfortunate phrase because it just rolls off the tongue and it's got that f sound that sounds kind of fascist. But if you break it down, there's absolutely nothing objectionable about any of those component parts, and I think most of us continue to value in some sense. But I think partly what I was trying to do is to understand that each of them is actually quite a modern and liberal thing in the way that we understand it now. So when we talk about family, we're not talking about a tribe, about ethnic ties, about we're not saying nepotism is a good thing. We're saying not just my family matters, but that the idea of the family and other people's families matter. So you might want to have family-friendly policies, and that's not about putting yourself ahead of others. I don't happen to have kids, but I would support family-friendly policies because I think it's a good thing for other families to flourish and people to benefit from that. And similarly with flag, the modern nation, I think we've passed the idea that our country is better than all the other countries. I mean, we can have sporting banter and so on, but really it's a polity of where you happen to come from, more like a family. Because nobody, you buy your dad a best dad in a world mug. It's not an objective claim, right? It's an expression of love. So when you say you love your country, you're not saying your country's better than other people's country necessarily. There'll be things you like about it, but it's kind of a given. And similarly with faith, um, the whole history, the modern history of Britain was, starts with religious wars and so on, and the gradual depoliticization of faith, but the idea of freedom of conscience as well. I think those ideas, so that's quite a modern understanding of it. So when we say faith, flag, and family are good things, we're not really making this kind of triumphalist, ethnic or religious or nationalistic claim, but it's more about these are kind of the foundations of human civilization, including modern civilization.
I think one of the things that you said in that article was that they're all ideas that perhaps the modern left treats with a little bit of contempt. The family is seen as this, site of abuse. The nation's something you should be ashamed of rather than proud of. And faith is something that, particularly Christian faith, is something that perhaps nobody particularly thinks you should shout about. So is there a way to kind of reinvent those values in the modern world?
I think so. I mean, I think it has to start with the fact that they still mean something to people. I mean, family is the easiest because we all have families, and for the most part, we love them, and want other people's families to flourish as well. I think one way to think about it is in opposition to, or not so much opposition to, but in relation to the state. Um, uh, is the state there to replace those things? And I think sometimes maybe that's where the modern left has gone a bit wrong, that you've almost got a kind of religion of the state, that it's the state that should be looking after people, that is responsible for um, um, regulating and so on, rather than there to serve things. I think if you've got a healthy kind of sense of a civil society, families, a nation that feels like it has some kind of identity, whether there's faith involved in that or not, the state should be at the service of those things rather than defining them. And I think if you take something like education, do we think of education as something that the state does to the people or for the people? Um, and to combine that with faith, maybe it's an interesting thing. If you had to take a look at Catholic schools, so I grew up in Glasgow, where I went to non-denominational schools, but there were lots of Catholic schools as well, and those are Catholic state schools, so they're paid for by the government, but they're run by the church to some extent, and so on. And some people really object to that and saying, no, if the state is doing it, then it should be secular all the way down, and but that to me suggests that the state is taking on, well, we're going to take your children and educate them for you or over your heads, and what you think about it doesn't really matter. And I think if you've got Catholic families, and they want their children to be educated in that way, I think that's quite legitimate. I mean, of course, there would be a line if they were to teaching a kind of extreme version of Catholicism that was very discriminatory against other religions, or was triumphalist or supremacist, something like that. That would be a problem. But I think within reason, within certain remits, we should see things the state do as being there to serve the public, and not sometimes vice versa, the idea that the state comes on top.
Yeah, I suppose that one of the things that we grapple with, certainly in the SDP, is it's kind of slightly different three words that we use. We use family, community, nation, and when I see those on our leaflets, it does actually give me a bit of a warm glow. I do quite like it, but when you try and say that out there in the real world, we're going to be knocking on doors soon, aren't we? And I'm thinking I'm never going to knock on a door and talk about family, community, nation.
And I was speaking to somebody on Saturday who's uni age, and she said to me, Do you know, I was really surprised, like positively surprised when I learned more about the SDP, because I thought it was going to be just a bit like Christian nationalist. And I said, why? And she said, well, you feature the word family on your leaflets.
Oh
And I thought
gosh.
it's the, do you know this phrase that is sort of going around at the moment, like coded, you know, like left wing coded or something like
Yeah.
that. I think people would say that it's sort of Christian nationalist coded to be talking about family, community, nation, even though I don't really know when that happened, you know, when the change was, because when I was younger, talking about it would have been such a banality for a politician to say we need policies that work for families, because it's like we all have families, don't we? It's one of the very few things that unites all of us is we all have a family to some extent.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's an interesting point because I think one thing is we want strong families, and if you have strong families, you don't need such a strong state. And that's, I think sometimes there's an idea that the state becomes a kind of family. I remember there was some, I can't remember who it was, so I won't name them, but there was some commentator talking about the fact that she'd been um, claiming benefits, and then someone had said, "But you've got a rich family." But she was estranged from her family and didn't feel she could go to them. And obviously, sometimes that happens to people, and they don't, you can't always depend on your family to look after you. And it's good that there's a state safety net there. But I think the idea that you might look first to the family by default is still a good one, and that that you might have policies that try to support that rather than saying, well, it's not right that anyone should depend on the family because the family might be horrible, racist, homophobic, yada yada yada, and so they can come to the nice neutral state instead. I think instead of that, we should have a default that assumes that families are benign and beneficial, um, and that the state is there as a backup when needed, rather than everyone's immediate recourse for whenever you need something, you go to the state. And there's a certain type of left-wing mentality that says, well, that's the only way to be fair about it. So everyone's got the same relation to the state, because obviously families are different. Some are rich, some are quite poor, some are loving, some are a bit dysfunctional. But I think we have to kind of if we want more than to be families to prosper and to be to work well, we need to be unashamed about having policies that support and reinforce that, rather than having the state there as the kind of backup all the time.
Yeah. I suppose if we move on to nation, so the nation bit kind of brings us into the territory that you covered in that Strangers
Mm.
Substack post, which I thought that was really interesting because it was talking about ideas about belonging and integration, and these are obviously things that are very much in the zeitgeist, in the vibe, you would say, wouldn't you, at the moment, as we talk about things like immigration, how do we integrate communities? Do you want to say something about that whole idea of belonging and how we create belonging?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's kind of a default thing, and the nation's best understood, I think, by analogy with the family. Again, it's kind of an accident that you're born into a particular nation. I mean, very few of us choose the nation that we live in. Obviously, some people do, but that's very much the exception. And so there's a certain givenness to that. Um, and if you grow up in a particular place, um, one of the points I made in the essay was that there's a common sense idea that if you're born and grow up somewhere, then you belong there, even if you're a different race, or your parents have a different kind of ethnicity. And I think that's good. Most of us feel that. That's why people were so outraged by the Windrush scandal, because these weren't just people who'd got off a plane from somewhere. They'd been settled and living in Britain for decades, in many cases, and so in some sense they are just as British as the rest of us in a particular way. You think British Caribbean people have a particular way of being British that's distinctive, but is different from people who live in the Caribbean who are not British. Um, so there is that, but I think if you assume that people who grow up here are kind of slowly inculcated into some kind of Britishness, then that makes sense. But I think what happened in the past generation or two, 20, 25, 30 years, is there are pockets of migrants who aren't really being integrated into anything. This whole parallel lives thing that was talked about as early as 2000, was it the Cantle report? Um, so that they grew up within the geographical limits of Britain, but weren't really participating in British institutions or imbibing British culture in any sense. And I think that should have been a red flag, and it was a red flag. But then the idea that, well, that's happening, but just carry on having migration coming in there. It's not really whether about migration is a good thing or a bad thing. It's all about the context. Migration into an environment where people can be integrated can be a fantastic thing. But if that's not working, then just channeling more and more people um, into places where they're not going to integrate is a mistake. And I think that's been happening for the past couple of decades.
We have, as a kind of a nation, when people say, what does it mean to be British? I think one of the things that people land on quite often is that we are tolerant. And actually, we don't mind people keeping their customs and their religions. It's very different to France, where, there's a kind of imposed secularism. So what's when we talk about cultural integration, I don't think we're necessarily saying that people have to adopt all our customs. But there's a minimum level at which we need to say that people have to accept the kind of political settlement, don't they? They have to accept that we have free speech and the right to blaspheme and the right, not having kind of sectarian political parties. That it's those kind of things that I think are important parts of integration, rather than saying that, you can't eat or celebrate in the ways that you have done in the past.
Absolutely. I mean, you can be completely British, but you can be a Republican, right? So you don't have to be saluting the flag and supporting the monarchy. You can despise tea and not like fish and chips. That's fine, but you have to drive on the left-hand side of the road. You can't. There's certain rules that are kind of non-negotiable, and then beyond that, and more a bit more meaningfully, there's those things that you've spoken about. What I would note though is most of those things are basically Western civilization. They're not peculiarly British. Talk about freedom of speech and association. They land slightly differently in different Western countries and in different developed countries. Japan kind of has those things with peculiar way, and I think we can be much more tolerant of people as long as they accept. If you want to live like a Frenchman in England, no one's really going to worry about that. And if you want to live like a modern Indian in Britain, as many people do, the fact that your cultural preferences and so on aren't going to offend anyone because you sign up to the basic ideas of democracy and free speech and so on. So I think those are the important things, and there can be more. We can be tolerant without that. What I would say also is that the way we talk about we were speaking about family earlier is important, because if you come to Britain, but your first loyalty is to a particular community, and you want to give jobs to people from your community, and you want to live in that community and not have connections with any others, that becomes more of a problem because you're not integrated. So the hook behind the Strangers essay was, I noticed it was shortly after Keir Starmer talked about his Island of Strangers thing. But I was reading Roger Scruton's book, England an Elegy, where he spoke about England as a society of strangers, and he meant it in a positive way. And what he was talking about was the fact that, well, the English character can be a bit aloof, but also there's a certain arm's length thing, that you respect your fellow citizens, not because you're related to them, or because you've got some blood tie, or even because you've got some ideological affinity with them, but simply because they are your neighbours, and you kind of can rub along at arm's length. And I think that's the kind of what I would call liberal modernity, and particularly with an English accent, you may want to say. And you don't have to have the accent, or any British accent, as long as if you have that idea of what it means to be a civilized modern person. And I think it's only when people don't have a problem with that it becomes an issue, really.
I always think that when one of the things is when you fly back into the country, and no matter where you are, there's something I love about the fact that there is just a Britishness. There is a British idea of humour, of relating to each other. So you let's say you're about to go through immigration control and you're meeting another queue of people, and it's like, oh, you're all right, yeah, you're there, and everybody sort of makes the same jokes. Yeah, like we have this sort of tendency to, and it's not to be funny; it's to be relatable. I think so. It's like to be able to relate to anybody in the country wherever you are. And I noticed that. I know that there is a different culture in Scotland. Like it's a very vibrant and stark difference in some ways, but there's still that thing that sort of ties everybody together, and it's almost difficult to to put your finger on. And I sort of worry that thing should be that I think that should be outside of politics in some way, or certainly it's like the thing that once we start to argue about it within the political arena, something's gone wrong, because that's the sort of stuff we're good at. We don't need to worry about that. It's much more like, I think you're kind of right on it should be about political integration rather than cultural integration, because I think we're fine with the cultural, provided that the politics gets it right. The fact that if you're going to have a massive influx of people, it's going to be much harder for them to integrate. If you're going to have, you're going to allow certain behaviour, it's going to be harder for integration to happen. Do you see what I mean? I think we're sort of looking at it from the wrong angle, perhaps.
I do. I just got to pause 1 second, because I got a phone call coming through, I just want to check that it's still recording. Just, sorry, rather than us get to the end and then it's not recording. Yeah, sorry, giving you something to edit there, Sebastian, sorry.
And that's quite a good segue if you're willing to.
Yes.
Because I wanted to get onto phones.
Just before we do that, just one other thing that I thought was good in that article was just about the flagging. Because we've discussed that a few times, haven't we? And people have different views of the flagging. And I thought it was really interesting that you said, Dolan, that you felt that when people put all these flags up around their community, they're saying, this is my home, isn't it? Almost. They're kind of checking that's right. Which I thought that was a really interesting take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think because that's it. I don't think it's saying you're not included or you're not included. It's saying there's something to be included in, and this isn't an airport. This isn't a completely neutral space. It's England or Britain or even particular locality, and there's a sense that has a particular character and that matters. It's not an accident. So I mean, the last thing to say about that character, when people talk about Britain being tolerant and having that particular sense of humor and apologizing all the time, all that kind of stuff. But even the tolerance side of it, if you say Britain is tolerant, or sometimes the left in Scotland say we're more pro-immigration because we're a very friendly and welcoming nation, not like those English. But even to say that is to say that you have a particular character, and you have a national character, and you want to preserve it. And you might want to think, well, is it in danger at all if you have unlimited migration, if you don't think carefully about how you bring people in, if you don't, if you have pockets of migrants who don't connect to the rest of the society, are they going to pick up that tolerance, that friendliness, the character that you want? And I think that should be that's never really been considered a valid aspect of immigration policy, and I think it completely should be. How can we protect the national character? What we value about it, and that, let's wear that loosely. We're not talking about a very strict idea of what it means to be British. But there is such a thing as Britishness, and I think it's valid for the British government to be concerned about that and want to protect it.
Great, yeah. So go on, I'll let you segue into phones now.
Phones. Well, you wrote something, I think quite recently, didn't you, on phones? I wondered if you could just speak on that a little bit, and then maybe we could talk about this this proposed ban. I know Hilary feels quite strongly about it, so can you just elaborate on what you were saying in your article?
Well, people talk about we need to ban phones or ban phones for kids, and we complain about people being on their phones. And it occurs to me, we all say it's bad to be on your phone, but we're not talking about someone reading a book on the Kindle app, or even watching a Take Me Home podcast on YouTube, or sending an email to their granny, or all the kind of nice things, positive things, productive things you could be doing on your phone. And that's because when we say we're talking about on the phone in a negative way, we're talking about something quite specific. And I think the best term that's been coined for it is doom scrolling. When people go on social media and it's just this, and I can relate to that. I think we've all seen how that behavior is kind of encouraged by the technology itself or by the people behind it, and that is negative. It's a waste of time. Often it's people being dragged into kind of rage bait and all this kind of stuff that's not very helpful and is kind of driving people mad. So when we say, people on their phones, we're talking about something more like that than the productive use of phones. And I think it's just helpful to make that distinction and to acknowledge that actually we do have some agency. It's not that when you pick up your phone that all those clever boffins at Facebook or TikTok have now controlled your brain. But we do have to be quite deliberate about it, and especially kids who don't have necessarily the self-control have to be encouraged to develop that self-control. So I think it's a question of recognizing what we're talking about when we talk about phones in that negative way.
That's interesting. So there's a real issue, I think, about people who spend a lot of time on X. That kind of seems to spill over into the way that they maybe interact in other areas, which I do think that is a problem. And so I don't want to underplay the fact that I think social media can be really corrosive of relationships and of kind of political discourse. I think the ban is something a little bit different, though, and it wasn't really the way you were tackling the subject, but perhaps we just trickle into it anyway. So I do think the problem with the ban on social media for under 16s is two things. One, it undermines parental authority, and it's parents who are best placed to know what's right for their child. And it also imposes on the rest of us a requirement that we prove that we're not under 16. So that's kind of an intrusion into privacy. It's almost digital ID by the back door. And those are things that I worry about it. Because you quite like the idea of a ban, don't you?
Oh, I don't know. In some ways, yes. I think one of the biggest arguments for a ban on social media is that it actually helps parents in many ways, because I think a lot of parents don't want their kids to be using social media, but it's very difficult to make the argument to the kids to say, I don't want you on social media when all of your friends are. And there's almost like a collective spirit where we all say, okay, are we all in agreement that we're all going to get off this and we're all going to stop using it? And I mean, maybe ban it for everybody, ban it for adults as well. Yeah. I mean, I use social media for work, solely for work, but I feel the negative effects of it. And I think it's something that I think we're trapped in a binary between those that say, oh, come on, people have agency, it's really, really useful. If you don't like it, get off it. And on the other side, people saying it's really pernicious. We need the state to deem what we can and can't do. And I think there's somewhere in the middle that I'm sort of intrigued about. You'll have seen that in Australia they banned it for under 16s. And I just think we could have a similar approach to social media that we have to something like alcohol, for example. Now, alcohol in the home, I think it's something like as long as you're over 5, you can drink in the home. Is it something like that?
I don't know.
But we sort of have the societal expectation is that, you know, kids shouldn't be going out and drinking. But if they're at home and their parents sort of says, go on, have a sip of wine, and it sets us up to have this idea that this is a potentially harmful thing and we have to have a healthy relationship to it. Rather than at the moment, I think a lot of parents feel that their kids just have to have social media as soon as they're of an age where all their friends have it. And I think we need to reset our society's relationship with social media.
Does it go back to the argument you were making at the beginning, Dolan, about education, where now people expect the state to parent for them almost?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sebastian's right that a lot of parents would be attracted to it because they think, well, great, it's not on me anymore. I can just say it's the government. The government says you can't have it, Johnny. But in a sense, it's making life easier for them because they don't have to assert authority. And I think maybe it'd be a good thing if they did assert authority. Because when we talk about the social norms is an important thing. Like you say about alcohol, for example. Like most of us don't drink alcohol at 10 o'clock in the morning, but it's not because there's any law that says we can't do that. And I think the government's not actually very good at establishing social norms. The law is a blunt instrument. So instead of bringing about a cultural norm, it kind of has that, just takes the agency away from people. I think, I mean, you're right, though. It's if you can team up with others, I think, in terms of like a group of parents talk to each other and say, like, we're all going to not let our kids have phones, or we're going to regulate it in this way or that. We're going to instill these expectations. That's much more powerful. But it's not about the government stepping in and doing that for them, because that way the temptation is to say, look, I would let you have it, I really would, but big bad Mr. Government computer says no. When actually you need to be able to say, well, I don't think you should do this, and here's why, and have a kind of reasoned argument, and that's what we develop a culture of. I mean, so this stuff is quite new. Kind of smartphones have only been around or widely used for what 10, 15 years. Um, uh, so it's natural, I think, that things go a bit wonky and then people kind of rein things in. But I think it's important that we're the ones doing the reining in as a society, and it's not really, if government steps in, then it actually prevents us from doing that rather than helping.
I agree. Parental autonomy, I think, is really important, and authority.
I'm still not sure where I sit on this, because I think we overlook the nature of social media, because I think within this conversation there are different understandings of what social media is, how useful it can be, etc. And I'm just of the opinion that it's pretty much not necessary at all for anybody under the age of 18. And I think WhatsApp, for example, I wouldn't consider social media, because that's a way of communicating. Like, that's the modern equivalent of the telephone on the wall. Whereas things like, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, I think they're incredibly dangerous, and we should start treating them in the way that we treat other social ills like alcohol, or because alcohol in itself we all would all agree is not bad, to have a sip, but there is a harmful element to it, and I think we as a society are overlooking that, or perhaps because we're all addicted ourselves, we're just kind of accepting that our kids will be as well.
I would just say I think it's important that people recognize that for themselves, because most people who drink alcohol have had a hangover at some point and know what happens when you go too far. If they hadn't, because somehow the government prevented them ever getting a hangover, you think, ooh, what will happen if I can just keep drinking and drinking? And again, with social media, most of us know what it's like to use it in a sort of toxic way, and see that we don't like what it's doing to us. And I think from our own then deciding not to use it, or to make fun of each other. Oh God, you're using Facebook like a loser. I think that's a lot more healthy than again.
I agree with you 100% for adults, and I also think with alcohol, it's great to have that healthy, upbringing where we're slowly bringing our kids up with it, rather than sort of just offloading it. I think this is the thing that gets missed. That is, when a kid just gets onto social media, the parents have no idea what's going on with that. And I know that there are certain controls, and you could talk about tech companies bringing in certain things, but I think that's putting too much power into their hands rather than the state.
I mean, you don't need technical controls. You can just take a phone off a kid.
I think it's, well, I don't have kids, but I think it's a really, really challenging thing to be bringing up kids in the age of social media. Okay,
well, let's agree to disagree. Let's disagree agreeably.
Yeah, I'm not coming out strongly on the other side. I still don't know where I sit on this.
We're not on Twitter, are we? So
we're not on Twitter. Exactly. So shall we move on to Culture Club? We've not done a Culture Club for so long, have we? So I know you've got something, Dolan, but shall I go first just to give you a little rest?
Right.
So I want to talk about, I went to see HMS Pinafore at the English National Opera last week, the Coliseum in London, which is one of those like really ornate theatres, the beautiful theatres. And it was fantastic. So this is Gilbert and Sullivan. Do you know it? No? Do you know it, Dolan? Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of Gilbert and Sullivan, but I'm familiar with the...
I love it. In fact, I think on Culture Club before I have talked about Pirates of Penzance, which I think is actually slightly better than HMS Pinafore, if I'm honest. But so HMS Pinafore is much more, I would say, almost slapstick comedy. So there's loads of double entendres and there's things that maybe don't even have a double meaning. They're just a bit bawdy. So it's, late 1800s, set on a ship. It's a kind of class story, really, about the captain's daughter falling in love with the lowly Jack Tar sailor. And the captain tries to introduce her to the admiral of the fleet, his daughter, because that's who he wants her to marry, and she doesn't want to marry him. And I won't tell you the whole plots, twists, but anyway, it's a happy ending, which is nice. There's two things I wanted to talk about in it. One is that I think the best song in it is He Is an Englishman, which kind of ties back into the discussions we've been having about flags and nation and all that. And there's there's a line in it where he says, he's resisted all temptations to belong to other nations, for he is an Englishman. And at that point, they all kind of get their flags out, and there's right across the back of the stage, you get this kind of puppet, you might say, of Boris, you know, when he was on that zip wire with the flags flying off him. And it was just so funny. The whole place erupted. It was really, really funny. Absolute comedy with a Gilbert and Sullivan twist. It was fabulous. So it's a big recommend from me.
Very good.
Good. Dolan, you wanted to do something a bit more highbrow, I think.
Oh, I don't know about that actually. No, over the Christmas I was reading this an anthology of Scottish religious poetry from the 6th century to the present, which is partly because it's a kind of research for the fiction that I write set in the past. But what really interests me about it is that the earliest poetry in Scotland was actually written by monks, so it was in Latin and Irish rather than in English or Scots, and it just shows the kind of. I mean, it's true that Britain's been divorced for a long time, but not in the way we are now. But there's something in that. So I thought I'd read a very short one for you, if that's all right.
Superb.
Which is by St. Ronald of Orkney, who's writing in the 12th century. And this is actually translated from the Old Norse. And it's an early example of international banter. It's called Mockery of Irish Monks on a Windswept Island. I've seen 16 women, at once with forelock on forehead, stripped of the old age of the earth, on the serpent field walk together. We bear that witness, that most girls here, this isle lies against the storms of out west, are bald. Now, you might not pick up on it, but there are no girls or women really here. He's talking about monks with their shaved face and their tonsures. So I just think it's really funny to have most of the poems in this book are devotional poems or praising God and so on. This one shows the lighter side that you can actually make fun of monks.
Superb.
Amazing.
And I'm sure there's hundreds of kind of 1970s comedy shows that did something similar to that.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So thank you, Dolan. That has been a really fantastic guest episode.
Thank you.
Thank you to our other celebrity, Sebastian, our
And good luck,
candidate. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And we will be back next week. So see you then. Thanks for listening.